All right, everybody, welcome to Standing for Truth. And the question is, what are we doing? What are we focusing on in this video? Well, I am going to be spending some time refuting inspiring philosophy and the local flood theory. And so with that, I'm just going to get right into it. I do have some slides, some visuals. And before I refute the local flood theory, I would like to accurately convey inspiring philosophy's argument. Now, this is not going to be an incredibly long video because what my goal is to address in shorter videos all of inspiring philosophy's top 10 biblical arguments for why young earth creationism is apparently false. And what we've done in the past is engage comprehensively inspiring philosophy. I had, going back 2 years ago, I had Dr. Jonathan Sarfati on, and we engaged all of inspiring philosophy's arguments for the most part in detail. We've provided an extremely technical and sophisticated scientific case for separate ancestry and against theistic evolutionism. We just recently had Eric Hovind on for over 2 hours, where we reviewed many aspects of the uninspiring compromisers debate with Eric. Eric did a fantastic job. We have done an entire series with CJ Cox, hours and hours worth, going through every inspiring philosophy's video here. Top 10 biblical problems for young earth creationism. And inspiring philosophy, he won't respond because he doesn't have any real good rebuttals. But most importantly, he can't address the science. He can't address, for example, the genetic-based data for young earth creation and separate ancestry. So what I want to do, in no specific order, we've already demolished all of inspiring philosophy's arguments, but I want to provide some shorter videos, some additional thoughts that maybe we haven't touched on so far. But if you are looking for just an incredibly comprehensive takedown of all of inspiring philosophy's arguments, make sure to check the channel and the website, as we have put out several lengthy videos addressing inspiring philosophy, and he has yet to respond. So here's the main argument that I want to focus on today. This is problem 9 in his video. And so in his video against young earth creationism, inspiring philosophy scoffs, and you can go watch his video and see this, problem 9. He scoffs at the worldwide flood of Genesis by pointing to Genesis 8, verses 4-5. This passage tells us that the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. It also says that the tops of the mountains were seen. He then points to Genesis 8, verse 9, where the dove sent out by Noah had no place to set her foot. The dove returned to the ark because the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. Inspiring philosophy says this is a contradiction to a global flood interpretation, because the text cannot then literally mean the entire earth was covered. He essentially says the flood account may just be hyperbolic and indicate a local or regional flood. I strongly believe in not misrepresenting our opponent's arguments. And so you can see for yourself in his video, problem 9, this is an accurate reiterating of his argument. Now, what I plan to do in the future, this is a patron first video. What I am currently working on is a full presentation just debunking the local flood theory in general. And that will be released to the public right away. And it'll be a comprehensive video and more structured. And so, firstly, I want to point out when it comes to how we read the Bible, there's a lot of straw man argumentation going on from the Old Earth Creationist and Theistic Evolutionist camp. We don't read the Bible. We don't interpret the Bible with a wooden literalism. No, we read the Bible literarily. Let me repeat that. We read the Bible literarily. Okay? As in, we read it according to its what? Its context. Context is key. We use the context to determine the meaning of the passage. And we don't read the scripture from a wooden literal perspective, as most of these arguments that Inspiring Philosophy has put forth in his video and in his debates are based on this straw man understanding. Okay. Well, firstly, Genesis 8:9 describes the recession stage of the flood. Okay. Genesis 7, let's say verses 19 to 20, that would describe the rising of the waters, because the flood was progressive. And we've had full technical presentations on the progressive nature of the flood, as well as the recessive stage and the massive erosion that took place to form these canyons like the Grand Canyons, and the rapid buckling of the rock strata to uplift these mountains thousands of feet. Okay, we've discussed this in great detail in presentation form, open mic, so on and so forth. And so, yes, if you want to look to the rising of the waters to the tops of the mountains, you're going to want to look prior to the recessive stage of the flood. Okay, so basically your global flood covers all the high mountains. The Bible's pretty clear about this. But as the waters sank down, the mountaintops become visible as they become exposed. As the water is slowly receding, as the water is slowly sinking down, this is basic logic, then the tips, the tops of your mountains, they'll be visible, they'll be exposed. But the earth is still mostly covered in water, with the mountaintops now being visible, because we're in the recessive stage of the flood where the water's levels are sinking down. Okay. And so the parts of the earth being visible at this point are actually in the minority. The majority of the earth is still covered in water, and the majority proves the rule. Okay. Not this exception. As the water levels are receding, the waters are coming down. And so basically, as the waters come down more and more over time, more and more of the earth becomes visible. And so this is not a contradiction. This is a rather weak argument, in my opinion. When it comes to the local flood theory in general, okay, you can see a slide here, but the easiest way, I mean, there's so many easy ways to destroy the local flood idea. But firstly, what we find in the flood narrative, in the flood account in Genesis, is we find the double use of the Hebrew word kol. And you see here, this article from creation.com describes this as well. And so in the account, we read that all of the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. Again, all of the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. This is not local language. We find the double use of this word kol. All and whole are the same word in Hebrew, from my understanding, this word kol. And so when you have this double usage of this word, what God is doing is he is accentuating the point. He is emphasizing this point that literally all of the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. This is God's way of saying, you know what? Everything was flooded. Everything was covered, not just a local region. No, the entire planet was covered. Okay, so in the slide, it says the flood account is loaded with universal language. For example, the flood covered all the high mountains under all the heavens, Genesis 7:19. This is where you're going to want to go to see the rising of the floodwaters. Not his argument from Genesis 8. While sometimes a single all, the word kol, can be non-universal. Notice this, can be non-universal. The double kol in this passage points to the universal nature of the flood. The account also repeats that all, not some, but all humans and other vertebrates outside of the ark died, and only those on the ark actually survived. Also, many other details confirm this, such as the fact that the waters inundated mountains, including the mountainous region of Ara, in order to adequately buckle this rock strata to produce mountains in the first place, because we see mountains slowly rising today. But to actually initially uplift them, you would need catastrophic geological processes. And that's why catastrophic plate tectonics makes the best sense of this data, makes the best sense of these observations, because rather than the snail pace movements of the plates that we see today, okay, we would have had rapid plate tectonics. We would have had meters per second movements of the plates. And these meters per second movements of the plates, as these plates collide, that offers the necessary power, the incredible power and force to buckle the rock strata and rapidly uplift these mountains. And we have a confirmed prediction. If catastrophic plate tectonics were true, we should find evidence of this. And we do. We find evidence for rapid runaway subduction. Okay, because we find these massive slabs of cold rock deep within the earth, and they have not yet warmed up to the surrounding material or melted, telling us that they were just taken down there thousands of years ago through runaway subduction. Okay, these plates are coming and one goes underneath. We find them all throughout the earth, and they are the same density as the rocks at the top, telling us that they're basically the same temperature. They haven't warmed up. They haven't melted. If I had a coffee here and I put an ice cube in it and I left and my wife came down and she saw that there was a hot cup of coffee, steam coming, and the ice cube had not yet melted, what are you going to confirm? That the coffee's been sitting there for a while? No, the coffee hasn't been sitting there for a while. If you think about two cars coming at each other at a mile per hour, once they collide and hit each other, there's not enough force or power to really do any damage. Okay? The front of the vehicle might get a little scratch, a little damage there. But if you had two vehicles coming at each other at 80 to 100 miles per hour, that kind of force, you'd do some incredible damage. And that's like what we see with the snail pace movements of the plates today. There wouldn't be enough force, there wouldn't be enough power to rapidly uplift those mountains. But if they're coming at each other through continental sprint, now you have the necessary force, power, and weight to rapidly uplift these mountains. Okay? And so notice this, and the fact that God used a rainbow to promise never to send another such flood. Many local floods have occurred since, but not another global flood. And another thing, if the flood was local, why would you build an ark? Why would God tell Noah to basically build an ark that is the size of an ocean liner? Take two of every air-breathing land animal, including what? Including birds, for a local flood that you knew was coming. Why not just move? Why not say, oh, okay, 100 years, Noah preached for 100 years. Why not just move? Why not just tell the birds to fly away? If it really was local, there'd be absolutely no point. There'd be no sense in taking animals, since surrounding animals could basically just come in, repopulate the area after the flood, and there you go. You've got your animals without having to worry. Okay. And this is why the local flood simply just doesn't make any sense. When it comes to birds, there are birds that literally migrate every single year from Alaska to Hawaii. and there's no land in between. This tells us how far they can travel under certain conditions. And this is over 3,000 miles that these birds travel every single year in one go. This is a non-stop trip. And so there'd be no reason to take birds onto the ark for a local flood, because the birds can easily migrate. We see that today. We know that Jesus Christ himself looked back to Noah's flood to make a point about what? The coming judgment. Peter, in 2 Peter 3, says that the scoffers in the last days, they're going to deny three things. The creation, we understand that that has a universal meaning. It's not just talking about, well, God created just this part. No, God created the whole heaven and the entire earth. And then it talks about the flood. The world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. Peter clearly saw it as a worldwide flood, because the third event that the scoffers will deny is the coming judgment by fire. Would anybody say, well, the coming judgment by fire, that's just coming to a city near you, a local city in America, or a local city in Europe? No, clearly it's fire globally, universal fire, universal judgment, just like the creation. And so there is no hermeneutical justification for making the middle event, the second event, the flood, local. No, 1 and 3 are universal. 1 and 3 are global, universal, especially in terms of the creation. Okay. So the middle event must be universal as well. The world that then was. What's the world? It's the pre-flood world. Not just a local part within that world. No, the pre-flood world. He's looking back to the pre-flood world. The world that then was, because now we're in the post-flood world, being overflowed with water. That's the entire pre-flood world, and perished. Okay, so 2 Peter 3 demolishes a local flood. They have no hermeneutical reason or justification for making that second event, the world that then was being overflowed with water that perished, a local event. Notice this: under the whole heaven is used 6 times outside of the flood account in the Old Testament, and always with a universal meaning. You can look it up: Deuteronomy, Job, Daniel. For example, notice this: whatever is under the whole heaven, is that just talking about a local region, the Middle East, the Americas? No, whatever is under the whole heaven, meaning the entire heaven, the entire world, is mine, is the Lord's, said the Lord, Job 41:11. Are we supposed to take that as localized? No, of course not. This is a fatal blow. I remember, it must be going back on 2 years ago. Now, I did some impromptu debates with Rob Rowe from Sentinel Apologetics, and you can watch them on the channel, actually. We engaged theistic evolutionism on one occasion and the local flood theory on a couple others. And he utilizes a lot of the same arguments as Michael Jones, and he had no good response for this. The fountains of the great deep. All the fountains of the great deep, not some, but all. The fountains of the great deep are mentioned only in the flood account. Notice this: only in the flood account. Genesis 7:8 and 8. And Proverbs 8:28. The deep, which is the Hebrew word tahom, relates back to creation. Genesis 1:2, where it refers to the one ocean. So notice, all the land in one place and then all the ocean. The fountains of the great deep are in the ocean. And we see evidence with the mid-Atlantic ridge. Just picture a seam on a baseball that goes all the way around, okay? We have evidence for where the fountains of the great deep broke open. We have just subterranean vents around the planet as well, shooting water up into the ocean. Well, if they're shooting water up into the ocean, the water has to be coming down further than that, okay? And so notice this, where it refers to the one ocean, referring back to Genesis 1, covering the whole world before the land was formed. And it was not just the fountains of the great deep, but all, referring to the entire one ocean, because at that time you would have had a Rodinia-like supercontinent in the pre-flood world. And then during catastrophic plate tectonics, you'd have a mini supercontinent, which is Pangea, and then they would break apart, and eventually the continents would be where they are today. Okay. And so you basically have one massive ocean. And notice this. And it was not just the fountains of the great deep, but all the fountains of the great deep, which were broken open. And so this is not just a localized region. No, it's the entire planet. And so the local flood theory is basically, I mean, it's not even a theory, it's bankrupt. There's a lot of desperation in the arguments for it. I want to go to some evidence for the flood here, just to show why we don't have to push some kind of local flood when the Bible's clear and the scientific evidence is clear. And you'll hear these guys, like a lot of theistic evolutionists, they'll call Genesis mytho-history. You hear that from William Lane Craig. But the fact is, what we actually see in Genesis, the Hebrew verb form that's used in Genesis, that is, the Vav consecutive, and then this and this and this happened, that indicates we're actually dealing with literal history. But the most important point is when you take Genesis as literal history, the Bible claims to be the history book of the universe. This is confirmed through modern scientific data. We've literally discovered Eve, the mother of all living, Adam, the first man, in our genetics. And I've done hours and hours worth of presentations on that. So my point is, why would we ruin a perfectly good book with really bad theories? No, clearly Genesis is literal history. We have the Vav consecutive. That's what we see in terms of the Hebrew verb form. And this happened and then that happened. This is a narrative. This is telling us what literally happened, and it's backed up by the scientific data. And I'll debate anybody on the scientific data that supports taking Genesis literarily. Okay. Here on the screen, I find this interesting because we've actually seen rock layers form rapidly. We've seen it in real-time experiments. We've seen it in flume experiments. Okay. We have even seen limestone form in these strata machines. In 20 minutes, we've seen these layers rapidly form. And you'll notice how similar these experiments are, the observations, to what you see in terms of the millions of years worth of rock strata. No, the worldwide flood would have created a huge multitude of flumes, flume experiments on the earth at that time. All of this can be explained by a worldwide flood, by moving water. Okay, sedimentary rock layers require water to form, and we've literally seen limestone formed in these strata machines. We've seen limestone form in the creation research team, who we've had on many times. John Mackay, the creation guy, Joseph Hubbard. They're doing amazing work, incredible work, and they've seen limestone form in their fossil tank deposit that they've spoken on, okay, where they show that these trees are standing upright, and then the calcium carbonate will actually fall out of solution, and you can see crystal calcium carbonate forming on the spot. Okay, so it's not about time, it's about a process. And what do we have during that year-long flood is we have a process. We have a process that can rapidly form these layers. You don't need millions of years. You can see these layers, these fine layers, form right before your eyes, as you can see here, okay? And the fossils. I mean, look at the details in these fossils. Fossils require rapid burial. And we have evidence of fossils, creatures giving birth, creatures throwing up their dinner. It doesn't take millions of years to give birth. Okay, eating, throwing up, the sophisticated detail of these fossils. Why are trillions of dead plants and animals buried all over the earth? It's not about time, it's about a process. And we have these sedimentary rock layers that literally extend over entire continents and beyond. Your local flooders can't explain that. They can desperately try and say, well, it's just been a bunch of local floods all throughout history. No, that doesn't work, Because since these sedimentary rock layers extend over entire continents and beyond, you could just look at the Grand Canyon, look at the Tapete sandstones, or look at all these different layers that you can basically trace across the entire country, miles and miles and miles. And so what this requires is rapid deposition catastrophically. These layers had to have been deposited catastrophically, since you can literally, you have these mega sequences that you can match up continent to continent to continent. And this is especially true when you consider the trillions of fossil plants and fossil animals that are found all throughout the rock record in these layers that had to have been formed and laid down rapidly. Local floods can't explain what we see. The cause of these massive layers extending entire continents had to have been global and not local. They had to have been global and catastrophic. And yet the local flooders have no real way to explain this, but they'd rather twist and turn the scriptures to try and make it say something that it clearly doesn't. We talked about the cold slabs earlier. That is a prediction of flood geology. These subducted slabs of cold rock, they're found deep inside the crust of the earth, and yet they have not melted. They've not warmed up to the surrounding material. This is overwhelming. This is incredible evidence for catastrophic processes during the flood. Only rapid plate subduction could explain this. Okay. And another major point has to do with the ordering of the fossil record, which is best explained by a global flood. Notice, during a marine transgression, communities that are living side by side will be stacked vertically. So what do we see? This is what you need to do with the so-called geological column. The evolutionists want to interpret it according to their uniformitarian-based assumptions or actualist assumptions. Okay? And so they look at it over time. These are communities over time that they find in the rock strata. No, you need to turn it from vertically to horizontally. Basically, turn the vertical sediments of rock and tip it on its side horizontally. And then you see communities that are living side by side. They're being stacked vertically. These are not communities over time. These are communities living on the earth at the same time, but in different locations, different ecosystems. And so first we see marine organisms. Then we see a mixture of marine and terrestrial organisms. And eventually we see mostly terrestrial, but you have the marine organisms being found with the terrestrial organisms all throughout the rock strata. We find pre-flood communities pulled up and thrust over the continents. Incredible processes were taking place during this year-long flood. Earthquakes, volcanism, tsunami after tsunami, wave after wave, taking these marine organisms, throwing them onto the continents. And this is what we find. And this is also why we find a shift from lots of marine organisms to terrestrial, and then mostly terrestrial organisms, but still with marine organisms mixed in. And so we have communities, for example, the Cambrian community, right? So rather than looking at the Cambrian to the Ordovician to the Mississippian up to the Pliocene, no, you have these communities that are all living at the same time. The Cambrian community, the Ordovician community, the Mississippian community, the Jurassic, Triassic community, so on and so forth. And these communities are being buried during the year-long flood at different times, at different elevations in different places. And so it's not communities over time, communities evolving over time from simpler organisms, right? Fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal, and then more sophisticated mammals like humans. No, that's not what we find. These are communities living together at the same time, but simply not in the same place. We find communities being sequentially buried, and these communities lived at the same time. And this best fits a global flood. Okay. And so I got plenty of other slides, but I'm saving these for my general presentation on the topic. I think perfect. That was about 30 minutes, which was the goal, and mainly dealing with the local flood, and then problem 9, which isn't a problem at all. And it's kind of bizarre. Like, he needs to just go in there and edit out problem 9. As a matter of fact, he just needs to edit out the whole video, because these are not problems. These are not issues. And most of them are based on this misunderstanding, this straw man understanding of how we as young earth creationists interpret the scriptures. No, we don't interpret it in the form of wooden literalism. No, we interpret it literarily in light of its context in order to determine its meaning. We look at the genre. We understand that there are metaphors. We understand that there are parables. We understand that there is allegory, and so on and so forth. Okay. But when you interpret the Bible literarily, then you understand, okay, this is literal history. We need to understand this as literal history. This is not mytho history. This is not a parable. This is not a metaphor. This is real. And so, okay, I think we're going to wrap it up there. I hope everybody enjoyed this video, and stay tuned, because I'll be dealing with more of these so-called problems in future videos. God bless all.